In a quiet town where children's laughter once danced with the wind, silence fell heavier than any storm. A little boy who hadn't spoken a word since the day monsters came to steal his world. And a golden-furred guardian whose heart beat louder than 1,000 voices, when a silent hand gave a secret sign, when a golden soul growled at the unseen evil. Justice didn't walk in with a badge. It walked in on 4 paws, wagging a tail and carrying hope where the world had forgotten it. The town of Maple Hollow lay bathed in the soft honey light of a midsummer afternoon, its streets slow and lazy under the warm Montana sun. The sky stretched endless and blue overhead, stitched with the occasional whisper of a cloud, and the scent of pine resin floated on a breeze, barely strong enough to stir the flags outside the town hall. It was the kind of day where time itself seemed to nap, and the worries of the world drifted into the treetops with the call of morning doves. On the cracked sidewalk just off Main Street, Jessica Turner walked hand in hand with her 7-year-old son, Eli Turner. Jessica was a woman of quiet resilience, slender but strong, with chestnut hair usually tied back in a no-nonsense braid. Her face bore the faint traces of a life that had not been easy, soft laugh lines mixed with the subtle creases of worry, but her gray eyes held a determined kindness, especially when they looked at her boy. Jessica had been a single mother since Eli was 2, after a bitter divorce left her rebuilding her life piece by piece in the town where she had once dreamed of escape. Now, Maple Hollow was her haven, and she carried its rhythms in the steady way she moved, waving to neighbors with a warmth that masked her chronic anxiety. Eli, small for his age, with a mop of sun-bleached brown hair and wide hazel eyes, clutched his mother's hand tightly as they strolled past the town square, a worn yellow soccer ball tucked under his other arm. He was a bright, inquisitive child by nature, quick to laughter, always asking questions about the world. At least he had been until today. Their path meandered past the edges of the public park, where wild grasses blurred into the beginnings of the pine forest that wrapped around Maple Hollow like an old watchful guardian. Jessica paused to adjust her bag, and for a brief moment Eli wandered a few steps ahead, drawn by the gleam of movement at the tree line. It was there, just at the blurry edge between safety and shadow, that Eli saw her, a little girl no older than 5, her blonde hair messy and tangled with leaves, standing stiffly beside a man kneeling in the grass. The man was tall and lean, his ball cap pulled low to shade his features, wearing jeans and a denim jacket. Despite the heat, his voice was low, coaxing, but the sharp edge of false sweetness twisted the air like a bad chord. He held out a brightly colored stuffed bear, its limbs dangling limply from his hand, enticing the girl closer. Eli stood frozen, the soccer ball slipping from his grasp and rolling quietly into a bush. Jessica called his name, lightly distracted, but when she caught the frozen look on her son's face, she followed his gaze and her breath caught in her chest. She moved quickly, her instincts kicking in like a jolt of electricity, but by the time they reached the edge of the park, the man had melted into the woods, leaving the little girl standing alone, confused and clutching the bear. Jessica reported it immediately, her voice shaking despite her efforts to stay calm, and the police arrived within minutes. Deputy Sheriff Adam Cole was the first on scene, a towering man in his mid-40s, with a heavy-set frame, deep-set blue eyes, and a neatly trimmed salt-and-pepper beard. To the townsfolk, Cole was a figure of steady reliability, someone who had coached Little League and organized charity drives, the sort of man you waved to without hesitation. His voice, deep and measured, carried the practiced ease of a man used to diffusing panic, and he spoke gently to Jessica while ruffling Eli's hair with a big paternal hand. Yet, when Eli flinched away from his touch, Jessica noticed the hesitation but said nothing. That night Eli fell silent. No words at dinner, no giggles at bedtime, stories, no whispered questions about the stars when Jessica tucked him in. Just silence, thick and immovable, as if something had been locked away deep inside him. In the following days, therapists came and went, each trying in vain to coax a word, a nod, a tear. Anything but Eli remained wrapped in an invisible cocoon. Maple Hollow's golden afternoon seemed to dim, slightly shadows pooling longer under the eaves. 2 weeks later, following a desperate conversation with Dr. Matthew Hines, the town's child psychologist, Jessica, agreed to a different kind of therapy. Dr. Hines was a man in his early 50s, bespectacled, with a calming presence, often seen wearing corduroy jackets no matter the season. He had a reputation for thinking outside traditional lines, and this time he recommended a companion therapy dog, a presence that didn't demand, didn't question, just existed beside the child, allowing healing to unfold in its own rhythm. Thus entered Sunny, a 5-year-old golden retriever, whose fur shone like spun honey under the sun, a sturdy yet gentle soul with soulful dark eyes, and a tail that wagged with quiet reassurance. Sunny was not just any dog. He had once been part of a mountain rescue unit pulling survivors from collapsed cabins and snowed-in trails, until a leg injury forced him into early retirement. Underneath the easygoing demeanor lay the heart of a warrior, tempered by the soft patience of one who had seen too much and chosen kindness anyway. When Jessica and Eli arrived at the therapy center, the setting was deliberately different from the sterile clinics they had visited before. Warm wood floors, soft lamplight, and the faint scent of lavender created a home-like space. The trainer, Mrs. Abigail Monroe, was a retired schoolteacher turned canine therapist, a wiry woman in her late 60s with a shock of silver hair and a mischievous glint in her hazel eyes. She knelt beside Sunny, introducing him, not with commands, but with an open palm and a whisper, "He doesn't expect anything, sweetheart. He's just here if you need him." Eli stood stiffly at first. Shoulders, hunched fingers twisted in the hem of his t-shirt, but Sunny simply sat, head-tilted tail, sweeping a slow arc across the floor. No pressure, no demands. Slowly, impossibly, Eli crossed the room a step at a time until he could bury his small hand into the thick golden ruff at Sunny's neck. His eyes squeezed shut, and for the first time in days, his body uncoiled, tension bleeding away into that soft, patient warmth. As Jessica watched from the doorway, a sob rose unbidden in her chest, but she held it back, afraid to break the fragile spell. Dr. Hines placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, murmuring, "Sometimes healing begins when no one is asking for it." Across town, inside a federal building, nondescript save for the faint gleam of security cameras, Agent Claire Donovan reviewed the latest report with a growing sense of unease. Claire was a woman, shaped by loss and stubbornness in equal measure, standing at a wiry 5'7" with short, cropped black hair and a permanently furrowed brow that gave her an air of permanent skepticism. Her olive skin bore the faint traces of old fieldwork scars, and her dark eyes missed nothing. 3 missing children in as many months, all within a 50-mile radius, all last seen near public parks. Patterns whispered from the pages, too precise to ignore. Worse still, the newest field notes hinted at something far more insidious. A possibility Claire hated to even consider, that someone within law enforcement might be helping the monster slip through the cracks. She stared out the window for a long moment, watching the sun sink behind the endless pine trees before snapping the file shut. She would be going to Maple Hollow in person. Something there didn't fit. And Claire Donovan had learned long ago that when your gut screamed louder than the evidence, it was never wise to ignore it. By the time night fell over, Maple Hollow, the streets had emptied the last of the summer warmth, clinging stubbornly to the sidewalks. In a small house just 2 blocks from the park, Eli Turner slept with his fingers curled loosely into Sunny's fur, his breathing slow. And even for the first time in weeks, outside the open window a soft breeze stirred the curtains, carrying with it the distant scent of rain. Somewhere beyond the darkened trees, trouble brewed, but for now, for this fragile moment, Peace settled over the boy and his golden guardian. Sonny settled into the Turner household as if he had always belonged there, a golden shadow following Eli from room to room, his thick honey-colored coat catching the afternoon light like liquid gold. Though Eli remained silent, something unspoken had shifted in him, a loosening of the rigid tension that had kept his small frame tightly wound. In the mornings, Eli would sit cross-legged on the living room rug, idly threading his fingers through Sonny's soft fur, while the dog rested his head on the boy's knee, a living anchor in a world that still felt unsafe. Sonny was patient beyond understanding, responding to every small movement and silent signal with a sensitivity that no therapist had managed to reach. Whenever strangers approached delivery drivers, distant relatives, or town officials, Sonny's posture would shift subtly, his body placing itself between Eli and the unknown. He never barked, never growled without reason, but the silent protective stance he took was enough to make even the friendliest neighbor reconsider their approach. Jessica, observing this new bond, often found herself blinking back tears of gratitude mixed with fear. Gratitude for the lifeline Sonny provided. Fear that Eli's recovery was still so fragile it could shatter at a harsh word or wrong step. It was on a cloud-streaked Tuesday morning, the summer heat already beginning to cling to the sidewalks of Maple Hollow, that Jessica received a call summoning Eli to the sheriff's office for a conversation. Phrased so gently, it belied the tension threading through the voice. On the other end, Jessica arrived with Eli and Sonny in tow, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the whole building could hear it. Sheriff Douglas Reed, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a thick mustache and a weathered sun-browned face, greeted them with a strained smile. Sheriff Reed had served Maple Hollow for over 3 decades, a fixture so familiar that most residents had stopped questioning his presence altogether. Yet age and years of unspoken compromises had dulled his once sharp instincts, leaving him cautious to the point of paralysis. Deputy Adam Cole waited inside the conference room, standing by the window with his arms crossed, his silhouette sharp against the sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds. His uniform was impeccably pressed, his posture radiating casual authority, but there was a stiffness in his stance that did not match the easy smile he offered Jessica and Eli. Sonny's hackles lifted just slightly as they entered the room, but with a soft murmur from Jessica, he settled lying down beside Eli's chair, his warm flank pressing against the boy's small body. Jessica took a seat across from Cole, clutching Eli's hand, while the sheriff offered them both glasses of water with a forced air of hospitality. Deputy Cole spoke first. His voice smooth and level, he asked Eli a series of gentle, non-threatening questions. How was he feeling? Did he remember anything unusual about the man in the park? Had he seen where the man went? Eli said nothing, his wide hazel eyes staring at the table. It was not unexpected. Jessica had prepared herself for this, but then almost imperceptibly, Eli's left hand moved a small deliberate twitch at his side, a signal he had learned in therapy to indicate discomfort. Danger, something wrong. Sonny's reaction was instantaneous yet controlled. His body stiffened, ears tilting forward, nostrils flaring slightly as he shifted, subtly, putting himself squarely between Eli and Cole. It was not a dramatic move. There was no barking, no growling, only a sudden silent tension so profound that even Sheriff Reed noticed his hand pausing midway to lifting his coffee cup. Cole, for his part, laughed lightly and leaned back in his chair, adjusting the badge clipped to his chest as if to remind everyone in the room exactly where he stood in the town's pecking order. Jessica's heart thudded painfully. She had seen that same easy grin when Cole had first comforted Eli at the park, the same glint in his eyes that seemed too polished, too ready. She tightened her grip on Eli's hand, offering him a faint smile of reassurance. Later that day, as Jessica recounted the incident to Dr. Hines during a private session, The psychologist's brow furrowed deeply. Matthew Hines had always believed that healing for children like Eli was built on subtle cues, on learning when to trust and when to step back. Sonny is reading more than we can see, he said, scribbling notes onto a yellow legal pad. Animals like him, they sense what we overlook. Across town, in the dusty basement archives of the Federal Building, Agent Claire Donovan pored over missing persons files, her dark brows knit together in concentration. She had spent the last 48 hours immersing herself in every available record connected to Maple Hollow, tracing the slender, tangled threads of the missing children cases. One name kept resurfacing in odd ways: Deputy Adam Cole. Not formally implicated, not even officially mentioned, but present. He had filed several early reports closed out. Preliminary inquiries even handled the impounding of vehicles related to witness statements. It could all be coincidence, or it could be the soft, careful touch of a man who knew exactly how to cover his tracks. Claire leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her short, cropped hair. She was a woman who had been betrayed once before, by someone she trusted deeply, a former partner in the Bureau, whose hidden corruption had cost lives and left scars she still carried in her dreams. That old wound made her cautious. Now, even when caution felt like cynicism, she flagged the relevant files for re-examination and placed a discreet call to her superior, requesting an internal inquiry so quiet it would leave no ripple for anyone to notice until it was too late. Meanwhile, back at home, Eli and Sonny sat in their backyard under the spreading arms of an ancient oak tree. The sun filtered through the leaves in golden coins of light, dappling the grass and the boy's pale hair. Eli leaned against Sonny's side, a book open but forgotten in his lap. Jessica watched them from the kitchen window, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. Her boy was still locked away somewhere inside himself, but he was not alone. Sonny guarded him, not with bark or bite, but with presence and unbreakable tether to a world that might one day feel safe again. As evening crept over Maple Hollow, Claire Donovan stood at the edge of the town square, the wind tugging at the hem of her blazer. The sun dipped low behind the pine forest, painting the sky in bruised purples and fierce oranges. Somewhere in that quiet town, a predator lurked, wearing a badge, hiding behind trust. Claire set her jaw, a familiar fire flaring to life inside her. She would find him. She would not let another child vanish into silence. The courthouse of Maple Hollow was a square, somber building of gray stone and dusty windows built decades ago when the town still dreamed it might grow into something bigger. On this morning, the sky hung low, and heavy clouds the color of wet wool pressing down on the steeples, and the pine tops casting a gloomy hush over the streets. Inside the courthouse, the buzz of whispered conversations and the shuffling of shoes filled the air like the low drone of bees trapped behind glass. Jessica Turner gripped Eli's hand tightly as they made their way through the metal detectors, Sonny padding loyally at their side, his golden fur, a vivid patch of warmth in the otherwise sterile halls. Sonny wore his official therapy vest today, a deep forest green stitched with a simple patch, "Support animal, do not distract." Judge Walter McKinley presided over the courtroom, a man of 63, with sharp cheekbones, thinning white hair, and the deliberate movements of someone who measured words as a carpenter measures wood. His reputation was one of fairness, but he had a steel backbone honed by years of seeing too many broken families and too many fractured truths pass through his bench. Today, his black robes hung heavily on his slender frame, as he observed the courtroom fingers steepled under his chin, eyes flicking from the prosecution to the defense with the sharpness of a hawk. The defendant, John Reese, sat stiffly at the defense table. Reese was a man in his early 50s with thinning brown hair, a pasty complexion, and a narrow rat-like face that always seemed a bit too eager to please. He wore an ill-fitting suit and clutched a battered notepad with trembling fingers. Reese had lived alone on the edge of Maple Hollow for years, a reclusive figure whose presence had sparked more rumors than actual interactions. His neighbors spoke of him in tones reserved for the slightly odd but harmless. Until now, Eli, looking smaller than ever in the cavernous courtroom, walked carefully beside Jessica and Sonny toward the designated seating area. His face was pale, but his steps were steady, and he did not flinch under the dozens of curious, pitying eyes turned their way. As they crossed the aisle, Sonny slowed. His ears, twitched nostrils, flaring subtly, scanning the room. For a moment, his head turned toward the defense table where Reese sat hunched over. But then Sonny's body stiffened, and his focus shifted sharply toward the back corner where several uniformed officers sat. Deputy Adam Cole was among them. His broad frame relaxed, one arm slung casually over the bench behind him. He wore his uniform as naturally as his own skin, but his blue eyes flicked toward Eli and Sonny with a hint of tension around the edges. Sonny let out a low, almost imperceptible growl, barely more than a rumble under his breath. But Jessica felt it through the leash, a vibration that traveled up her arm like a warning signal. Judge McKinley called the court to order with a sharp rap of his gavel, his voice carrying easily over the sudden hush. "We are gathered today in the matter of the people versus John Reese prosecution. Please proceed." Assistant District Attorney Karen Wells, a brisk woman in her 40s with short-cropped auburn hair and sharp green eyes, rose from her chair. Karen was known for her precision in court, cutting through testimony like a scalpel. She laid out the case methodically. Reese had been near the park on the day in question, his van seen by a witness leaving the area. Though the evidence was circumstantial, fear and urgency had propelled the case forward. As Karen outlined the timeline, Claire Donovan watched from the back row, her arms crossed over her blazer, her dark eyes never leaving Deputy Cole. Claire had spent the past few days digging quietly into Maple Hollow's infrastructure and discovered a disturbing pattern. Maintenance records showed that the public surveillance cameras around the park had been disabled for routine upgrades the very morning Eli witnessed the attempted abduction. The work order had been signed off by none other than Deputy Cole. Claire's instincts screamed louder now. She flipped open a small leather notebook, jotting down details with swift, practiced strokes. A veteran of child protection investigations, she had seen betrayal wear many faces, but it was the ones hidden behind a badge that cut deepest. Back in the courtroom, Karen called Eli to the stand. Jessica knelt beside him, whispering encouragement, but her son gave no outward sign of hearing. Sonny followed Eli closely, lying down at his feet as he climbed into the witness chair. Karen approached slowly, respectful of the silence that wrapped the boy like armor. "Eli," she said softly, "you don't have to say anything today. If you can point or nod, that will be enough. Do you understand?" Eli's fingers curled into Sonny's fur, and after a long, aching moment he gave the slightest nod. Karen smiled gently and placed a board of photographs on an easel beside her various images of different men, including John Reese. "Eli, if you recognize anyone from that day, you can point." Eli's eyes moved across the images, wide and glassy. When they lingered on Reese's picture, a collective breath caught in the room. But then just as quickly his gaze slid away. No point, no nod. Sonny remained perfectly still, his focus unwavering toward the gallery where the officers sat. Karen pressed no further. She thanked Eli and moved to conclude her questioning. Reese's defense attorney, Alan Greaves, a slim man with thinning gray hair and a nervous twitch to his left eye, rose to cross-examine, but quickly realized there was little to challenge. He sat back down, face pinched. As the session recessed for lunch, Claire slipped from the courtroom and positioned herself in the hallway, observing Cole from a discreet distance. She noted how he spoke to Reese's attorney in low tones, a hand resting lightly on the man's shoulder in a gesture that might be casual or conspiratorial. When Cole caught sight of Claire's gaze, he smiled broadly, tipping an imaginary hat, before strolling away with deliberate slowness. Sonny, back at Eli's side, watched Cole go. His tail. Still, his eyes narrowed slightly. Jessica noticed and rested her hand gently on the dog's head. Whatever Sonny sensed, she trusted it more than her own rattled instincts. Outside, the clouds had thickened, and a light drizzle began to patter against the stone steps of the courthouse, Maple Hollow. For all its quaint charm felt heavier today, as if the trees themselves leaned in closer. Listening, Judge McKinley called the court back into session. More procedural evidence was presented, but the case against Reese remained tenuous. Claire leaned against the back wall, her mind racing. If Cole had tampered with the surveillance system, he had cleared the way for someone, or perhaps himself, to act without fear of being seen. The true monster. Claire thought Grimley might not be sitting at the defense table at all, and Sonny Golden and watchful beside Eli seemed to know it too. The evening settled over Maple Hollow in a heavy blue hush, the pine forests casting long shadows that reached across the narrow back roads, like fingers seeking something lost. A cool breeze stirred the grasses along the ditches, carrying the sharp scent of sap and damp earth. In the fading light, the old patrol station stood hunched against the landscape, its boarded windows and sagging roof, a forgotten relic of the town's past. Ivy clawed up the crumbling brick, and a battered sign, Maple Hollow Sheriff's Substation, creaked softly in the wind. Agent Claire Donovan stood at the edge of the property, one hand resting on her hip, surveying the scene with a practiced eye. She wore her usual field jacket, dark jeans, and boots scuffed from years of hard miles. Her short black hair was tucked under a navy baseball cap, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. Beside her, Jessica Turner knelt down to adjust Eli's jacket. Jessica's features were tight with concern, her brown hair pulled into a messy bun, stress lines etched more deeply into her face now than when Claire had first met her. Eli, small and pale, stood quietly holding tightly to Sonny's leash. Sonny, the golden-furred guardian, sniffed the air with a deep, thoughtful focus, his stance alert but not fearful. His thick coat gleamed under the dying light, and his dark eyes flicked constantly between Eli and the building ahead. Claire turned to them. "We're just going to have a look around," she said in her calm, clipped voice. "You stay close. If Sonny reacts, we pay attention." Jessica nodded without hesitation. Claire had earned her trust not through promises but through the steady, relentless way she moved like a river, cutting through stone. They crossed the overgrown yard toward the side entrance of the station. The door rusted at the hinges, groaned as Claire pushed it open with a gloved hand. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the lingering smell of mildew. Broken furniture lay scattered across cracked linoleum floors, and old bulletin boards still clung to yellowed, curling flyers. Sonny hesitated at the threshold, his nostrils twitching, then stepped forward, body low and careful. Claire clicked on her flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. She noted the empty filing cabinets, the shattered glass, the long-abandoned evidence lockers, but something didn't sit right. Eli tugged gently on Sonny's leash, drawing him toward a heavy metal door, set into the far wall, half concealed behind a toppled shelf. Sonny stopped in front of it, ears pricked, tail stiff. Claire followed his gaze. "Good boy," she murmured, reaching out to brush the dust from the doorframe. There, nearly hidden by years of grime, she found the faint outline of a keypad lock. Modern. Too modern for a building that had been decommissioned 5 years ago. Her heart thudded. She turned to Jessica, voice low. "Get Eli outside." Now, Jessica scooped her son into her arms without question, backing through the ruined hall toward the yard. Sonny hesitated a moment longer, eyes locked on the door before trotting after them. Claire drew a slender lockpick set from her pocket tools she officially wasn't supposed to carry and began working on the keypad. Within moments, there was a soft click, and the door swung inward on silent hinges. The stairwell beyond descended into darkness. Claire pulled a second flashlight from her jacket and started down the steps. The air grew colder as she descended, thick with the earthy scent of damp stone and old rot. At the bottom, she found herself in a narrow corridor, walls of raw concrete and exposed pipes snaking along the ceiling. She moved slowly, methodically, her light playing over the floor. There disturbed dust, fresh scuff marks. Someone had been here recently. She reached a second door, this one battered but unlocked. Inside was a small room lined with rusted shelves, many of them empty but not all. A handful of plastic bins sat against the far wall, labeled hastily in black marker. Claire crouched down, pulling one open children's shoes, a pink backpack with a missing zipper, a cracked plastic toy truck. Her stomach turned. Back upstairs, Jessica sat on the hood of Claire's car with Eli in her lap, her arms wrapped around him like armor. Sonny lay at their feet, head resting on his paws, but his eyes fixed on the darkened building. Claire emerged from the station and crossed the yard in long strides. "We found something," she said, voice tight. "I'm calling it in. We need a full team here and quietly." Jessica's arms tightened around Eli, who pressed his face into her shoulder. Sonny rose to his feet, tail down, leaning lightly into Jessica's side. Later that night, Claire sat with her laptop balanced on her knees in a dingy motel room just off Route 9. The screen glowed pale against the dark, wood-paneled walls. She cross-referenced the soil samples found caked on Deputy Cole's patrol car tires, taken discreetly from the evidence impound lot, with the soil from the old station's property. High clay, content traces of mica, low organic matter, a perfect match. She leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to know Jessica called just as Claire was closing her files for the night. Her voice was a whisper. "Eli had a nightmare," she said. He said something." Claire sat up straighter. "What did he say?" Jessica hesitated. "He said, 'The metal door.' He said it in his sleep." Her voice cracked. "He remembers." Claire closed her eyes for a long moment. The nightmares were memories clawing their way back to the surface. And the metal door, that could only mean one thing. Across town, Deputy Adam Cole leaned back in his easy chair, a beer balanced on his knee, watching the news without really hearing it. His face was relaxed, but his blue eyes flickered toward the window every few minutes, scanning the street beyond. The predator was watching. And for the first time, the prey was starting to turn around. Sonny, sleeping beside Eli's bed that night, stirred, once his ears flicking at some sound only he could hear. He didn't rise, he didn't bark, but his body tensed, muscles coiled ready. Waiting. The morning air in Maple Hollow was brittle and sharp, the early autumn wind carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered in small murmuring knots, their breath rising in puffs under the pale silver sky. It was a day that felt heavier than the low-hanging clouds, a day when whispers carried farther than shouts. Jessica Turner gripped Eli's hand tightly as they climbed the stone steps. Sonny, trotting faithfully at Eli's side, his green therapy vest snug against his golden fur. Sonny's nose twitched constantly, and he kept himself between Eli and the milling strangers with instinctive precision. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with an energy that could not be hushed. Judge Walter McKinley presided once again from the high oak bench, his weathered face unreadable, his black robes draped like storm clouds around his shoulders. Beside him sat court clerk Marjorie Phelps, a short woman in her late 50s with tightly curled gray hair and glasses perched precariously on her nose. Marjorie was known for her brisk manner and iron adherence to protocol, but even she seemed unusually tense today, tapping her pen against the desk in tiny nervous motions. Deputy Adam Cole stood among the uniformed officers, outwardly calm, his crisp uniform, immaculate, his posture loose and relaxed. But to anyone who looked closer, his blue eyes flickered too often toward the door, and the way his fingers tapped idly against his belt betrayed a current of tension beneath the surface. His clean-shaven jaw was tight. The skin stretched a little too taut over his cheekbones. Today, the facade of ease he usually wore seemed thinner, more brittle. Claire Donovan sat in the gallery, a silent sentinel in her dark blazer and jeans, her short cropped hair damp from the morning drizzle. Her expression was carved from stone as she studied Cole, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Beside her was FBI forensic analyst Peter Langston, a wiry man in his early 40s with thinning blonde hair, a crooked nose from an old boxing injury, and a quiet, dogged energy that made him ideal for field work. Peter had flown in overnight after Claire's urgent request, carrying with him sealed files and grim confirmation. At the front of the courtroom, Assistant District Attorney Karen Wells rose. Her voice was clear but measured as she called Eli Turner to the stand. The room stilled, every eye turning to watch, as Jessica gently led her son forward. Sonny, glued to his side, matching his hesitant steps with unwavering loyalty. Judge McKinley leaned forward slightly. "The therapy animal will be allowed to accompany the witness," he said, voice carrying no room for argument. Eli climbed into the oversized chair, his legs dangling above the floor. Sonny sat at his feet, pressing lightly against the boy's shin, his presence a steadying force. Karen approached, slowly carrying a board with printed photographs, one hand resting lightly on the easel. "Eli," she said softly, "you don't have to speak. You can just point if you see anyone you remember." Eli's fingers curled tightly into Sonny's fur. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, as if pulled by some silent unseen tether, he lifted his small hand and pointed, not at the defendant's table where John Reese sat, but across the room toward the row of uniformed officers. The point was deliberate, sharp. His arm trembled, but he did not lower it. Straight at Deputy Adam Cole. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed almost immediately by a wave of murmured confusion. Judge McKinley banged his gavel hard against the bench, calling for order. Cole stood still, but his eyes widened fractionally. The first crack in his practiced mask. Sonny reacted almost simultaneously, rising to his feet, his thick fur bristling a low, guttural growl vibrating from deep in his chest. It was not a bark for attention. It was a warning, a protector recognizing a threat. Cole's lips pressed into a thin line. He chuckled once, a forced, brittle sound. "Dogs don't make evidence," he said under his breath, but his voice carried farther than he intended. Claire's fingers tightened into fists in her lap. She had seen enough to believe the boy. Enough to trust the instincts of a dog who had risked everything once before, and had never been wrong. Judge McKinley ordered a brief recess, his face grave. The courtroom emptied slowly, heavy with a tension that buzzed louder than any words. In the narrow corridor outside, Claire cornered Peter Langston near the vending machines. She spoke in a low, clipped voice. "The files." Peter nodded, pulling a thin folder from his messenger bag. Inside were scanned copies of case summaries, some dating back 5 years, unresolved child disappearances within 50 miles of Maple Hollow. Each had been initially flagged, then quietly closed due to insufficient evidence. Each investigation had one thing in common. Deputy Adam Cole's name somewhere in the report, first on scene handling, evidence filing, final statements. Peter spoke softly, patterns clear as day. Different towns, different reports, but always. Cole, in the background, steering the narrative. Claire exhaled slowly, feeling the pieces click together with the cold certainty of a trap snapping shut. She flipped to the last page, a grainy surveillance shot showing Cole's patrol car near a park, hours before an abduction was reported. A park supposedly outside his jurisdiction. Back inside the courtroom, tension still clung to the walls like smoke. Jessica sat with Eli pressed against her side, Sonny resting his head on Eli's knee, his golden eyes half closed, but his body coiled ready to move at a moment's notice. Deputy Cole returned to his seat among the officers, but now there was a stiffness in his movements, a tightness around his mouth that hadn't been there before. His eyes flicked nervously toward Claire, once then away. Judge McKinley reconvened the session with a grim nod. "Proceed." Karen Wells approached the bench and requested an immediate review of the evidence provided by federal authorities, citing new information relevant to the witness's identification. Judge McKinley agreed without hesitation. In the back of the room, Claire leaned closer to Peter and murmured, "We've got him boxed. It's only a matter of time." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the courthouse windows like impatient fingers. A storm was coming not just over Maple Hollow's skies, but through the very heart of its trusted protectors. And Sonny, the Golden Guardian, stood at the center of it all, refusing to let the darkness win. The night cloaked Maple Hollow in a shroud of heavy mist, the kind that blurred headlights and softened even the sharpest edges of fear. The abandoned outskirts of town stretched into a patchwork of withered fields and sagging barns, and among them sat the old Whitmore farm, a crumbling relic that hadn't seen a working harvest in nearly 2 decades. The house hunched against the darkness, its roof caved in on one side, the porch hanging like a broken jaw. Wind sighed through the skeletal remains of the cornfields, carrying the smell of damp earth and rusted metal. Claire Donovan crouched beside the rear tire of a black SUV, adjusting the strap of her Kevlar vest. Her face was set in hard lines, the brim of her cap low over her dark eyes. The only light a faint red glow from the radios clipped to their belts. Claire had pulled every string she could to make this raid happen quickly and quietly, and now adrenaline hummed under her skin, sharp and bitter. Beside her stood Judge Walter McKinley, an imposing figure even stripped of his courtroom robes, his tall frame wrapped in a dark tactical jacket. His steel-gray hair was damp from the mist, and his expression was grim but resolute. Once a Marine in his youth, McKinley had kept the posture of a man ready for action, though years on the bench had tempered his fire with patience. The team assembled in tight formation behind them, 6 officers from the State Tactical Unit handpicked by Claire for their discretion and reliability. Among them was Officer Leah Sandoval, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s, her black hair pulled into a tight braid down her back. Leah had a reputation for moving silently and striking fast, a skill honed during several years of undercover work dismantling trafficking rings. Her presence here tonight was no accident. Jessica Turner waited anxiously in the command vehicle parked a few hundred yards back, keeping Eli close and Sonny even closer. Sonny's fur glowed faintly under the interior lights, his golden coat dulled by the weight of the mission ahead. He sat upright, his body tense, but controlled eyes fixed through the windshield toward the farmhouse, as if he could already sense what lay within. Claire's voice crackled softly over the radio. "Move in quiet." The team surged forward, weaving through the ruins of the fields, boots silent against the damp ground. They fanned out around the perimeter of the farmhouse, flashlights off, weapons drawn but lowered. Claire led Leah and 2 others toward the back entrance where the door hung crooked on its hinges. She tested it gently. It gave way with a soft whine. Inside, the air was thick with mold and decay. Claire moved first her flashlight, casting narrow beams along the cracked walls and broken furniture. Dust swirled in the disturbed air. and every floorboard underfoot seemed to groan in protest. In the living room, the remains of a mattress sat against the far wall, stained and torn. A low whimpering sound carried from somewhere deeper in the house. Sonny, straining slightly at his leash, let out a low, urgent bark from the doorway. Claire froze, raising a clenched fist to halt the team. Sonny tugged once, then veered toward the half-collapsed stairwell leading to the cellar. "Here," Claire whispered. "Basement." Leah moved past her, swift and silent pistol raised. Claire followed, scanning the room for traps or warning signs. They reached the basement door, solid wood, locked from the outside. Claire motioned to Leah, who produced a crowbar with practiced ease. 1, 2, 3 wrenches, and the door groaned open. The smell hit them first. Stale air, mildew, something sharper, fear. They descended carefully into darkness, thick enough to drown in. The basement was larger than expected, with cinder-block walls and a cracked concrete floor. Claire's flashlight swept the room and found them. 3 children huddled together in a far corner, their arms wrapped around each other, their eyes wide and hollow. They were filthy, dressed in torn clothing, their faces smudged with dirt and dried tears. A boy of about 10 shielded the others with his thin body, his jaw set in silent defiance. A little girl, perhaps 7, clutched a dirty rag doll to her chest. The youngest, a boy, barely 5, whimpered softly but did not cry. Claire lowered her weapon immediately, speaking in the gentlest voice she could muster. "It's okay, we're here to take you home." Sonny moved forward, low to the ground, his tail wagging slowly, soothingly. He stopped a few feet from the children, sitting down with deliberate calm. His warm brown eyes locked on theirs. The oldest boy hesitated, then slowly, cautiously reached out a hand to the dog. Claire's heart twisted in her chest. She keyed her radio. "We have them. 3 juveniles alive, need medics on standby." As the team escorted the children out, Claire's gaze swept the basement one last time, and something caught her eye. A battered locker half hidden behind a collapsed support beam. She pried it open. Inside was a small box sealed with duct tape. She peeled it back carefully, revealing a handful of old photographs, faded and curled. One of the pictures showed a little girl with a missing front tooth smiling wide at the camera. A bright pink backpack slung over her shoulder. Claire's fingers trembled slightly. She knew that backpack. It had belonged to her daughter, Lila. Gone 7 years now. Stolen. Claire pressed the photograph to her chest, her vision blurring. She could not afford tears, not yet, but the discovery lit a flame inside her so fierce it almost consumed her. Outside, the medics rushed the children toward waiting ambulances. Jessica ran to meet them, Sonny bounding at her side. Eli watched solemnly as the stretcher passed his small hand, tightening into a fist. Over his heart, Jessica crouched down, pressing a kiss to his hair, whispering, "You helped save them, baby. You and Sonny." Under the veil of mist and sirens, Maple Hollow was changing. Secrets long buried were clawing their way into the light, and a reckoning was coming. Claire Donovan stood beside the crumbling farmhouse, staring into the dawn's first pale rays. She slipped the photograph into her pocket, her jaw set. She had found the first thread, and she would not stop pulling until the whole rotten tapestry unraveled. The morning broke over Maple Hollow in a blaze of cold, clear sunlight, the kind that sharpened every corner and stripped away shadows. The streets buzzed with an energy somewhere between anxious and relieved as townsfolk poured into the square in front of the courthouse, gathering in heavy coats and knit caps against the early autumn chill. Children clung to their parents. Teenagers whispered behind cupped hands, and old-timers crossed their arms and muttered grimly. It was not every day that a trusted badge fell from grace in a town where trust had once been taken for granted. Deputy Adam Cole stood on the broad courthouse steps, his hands cuffed behind his back, flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the state agency. His face, once so polished and easy with a smile, was now drawn tight. His jaw clenched hard enough to show the white of his teeth. His blue eyes darted across the crowd but found no friendly faces. He wore his standard-issue tan uniform, wrinkled and stained from the scuffle during his arrest the night before. His badge removed his utility belt, stripped away like armor peeled from a false knight. Sheriff Douglas Reed, the aging lawman with the thick mustache and weary eyes, stood at the courthouse doors, his hat in his hands. There was no pride left in his stance, only a bitter kind of duty. Reed had been slow to believe the truth about Cole, but once the evidence piled too high to deny, he moved with the grim efficiency of a man making penance for sins he had never intended to commit. Claire. Donovan stood off to the side, arms folded, her dark hair tucked beneath a black beanie, her face a stoic mask. Her sharp brown eyes never left Cole as the officers marched him forward. Behind her, Peter Langston recorded every moment with a handheld evidence camera, his thin frame hunched against the wind. Jessica Turner and Eli watched from the crowd, Sonny sitting upright between them. Sonny's thick golden fur rippled in the breeze, and his dark eyes locked onto Cole with an intensity that needed no words. Eli clutched the dog's leash tightly, but today there was no fear in his posture, only a fierce, silent satisfaction. The crowd parted without resistance as Cole was led to the waiting armored vehicle. No one shouted. No one threw things. The silence of Maple Hollow was louder than any condemnation, a communal rejection that hit harder than words ever could. The trial commenced that same week, a rare acceleration that spoke volumes about the weight of the case and the hunger for closure. Judge Walter McKinley presided with a stern hand, his gavel striking the bench with finality at each objection and ruling. His gray hair looked whiter under the fluorescent lights, but his voice never wavered. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Karen Wells, who arrived each morning in tailored suits of deep navy or charcoal, her auburn hair pulled back into no-nonsense chignons. Karen moved through the courtroom like a force of nature, precise, relentless, and deeply respectful of the victims whose stories she now carried. Deputy Cole's defense was handled by a state-appointed attorney, Russell Hines, a balding man with watery eyes and an expression that suggested even he didn't believe in his client's innocence. He spoke little, objected rarely, and seemed to shrink further into his seat as each piece of damning evidence was presented. Witness after witness took the stand. Claire testified first, laying out the chain of evidence with cool surgical precision. Soil samples, camera records, tampered reports. Then came the parents of missing children, their voices thick with grief and rage. Some children testified, their words faltering but brave eyes darting toward Sonny whenever they needed courage. Finally, Jessica led Eli to the stand. The courtroom held its breath as the boy climbed into the seat. Sonny settling at his feet, Karen approached, gently offering him a small smile. "Eli," she said, her voice steady but soft, "do you know why you are here today?" Eli's hazel eyes flickered to Sonny, then back to Karen. He nodded once his small shoulders squared. "Do you remember who hurt those children?" A pause. Then clear and certain. Eli pointed across the room at Cole without hesitation. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge McKinley's final sentencing was swift. Cole was found guilty on multiple counts: child abduction evidence, tampering conspiracy to obstruct justice, and official misconduct. As the judge pronounced the sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Cole showed no reaction beyond a slight tightening of his jaw. The courtroom erupted in quiet, restrained applause. No cheers, no jeers. Just the slow, heavy exhale of a town beginning at last to heal. Later that day, in the bright courtyard behind the courthouse, Jessica knelt beside Eli. He was playing with Sonny, tossing a small rubber ball gently across the grass. The sun warmed his pale cheeks, and his hair shone like polished chestnuts. Jessica called his name softly. Eli turned eyes bright, and then without prompting, without coaxing, he said, "Thank you." "Sonny." Jessica's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes as she knelt and wrapped her arms around her son. Sonny barked, once a sharp, joyous sound that echoed through the courtyard. Claire watched from a distance, a rare, soft smile touching her lips. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in redemption. Not the easy kind, but the kind you fought for, bled for. The people of Maple Hollow moved forward too. Flyers went up around town about new safety programs, and parents walked with their children to school again. The old fears didn't vanish overnight, but they loosened their grip. Claire met with Jessica that evening at the town diner, a small cozy place with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years. Over coffee, Jessica asked the question hanging in the air between them. "Will you stay?" Claire stirred her cup thoughtfully. She looked tired, the lines around her mouth deeper, but there was a new steadiness in her eyes. She nodded once. "There's more work to do," Claire said simply. "And besides, I have something to find." Jessica squeezed her hand, silent understanding passing between them. With the town's quiet support, Claire launched a private investigation, reopening cold cases that had once been buried under indifference and fear. She wasn't just chasing shadows anymore, she was chasing hope, and sunny Maple Hollow's unlikely golden guardian remained at the heart of it all, watching, waiting, guarding the fragile new beginning they had fought so hard to reclaim. The afternoon sun spilled golden light over Maple Hollow, washing the town in a warmth that felt almost sacred. After months of fear and broken trust, the streets buzzed once more with the easy rhythm of life returning. Children's laughter floated through the air like music, mingling with the scent of freshly mowed grass and the distant sweetness of pies cooling on windowsills. The town square, once haunted by suspicion, now thrummed with the innocent energy of a community finding its way back to hope. At the center of it all, in the wide-open park, bordered by ancient oak trees, Eli Turner ran barefoot across the soft grass, a soccer ball bouncing ahead of him. His hair, a tangle of chestnut curls, shone under the afternoon light, and his face, once pinched by silence, now radiated pure joy. His laughter, bright, high, and unrestrained, rippled out like a blessing over the gathered townsfolk. Around him swirled a small group of children, some familiar and some new. Among them was Jonah Ellis, a wiry boy of 8 with an unruly mop of red hair and a toothy grin that could melt the sternest heart. Jonah had been one of the children rescued from the abandoned farmhouse, and though he still startled at loud noises, his spirit proved unbreakable, his mischievous nature returning day by day. Running alongside them was Mia Carter, a petite girl with dark braids and wide brown eyes, her laughter soft but contagious. She had once been shy, clinging to her mother's skirts, but the open arms of Maple Hollow and Sonny's gentle presence had coaxed her out of the shadows. And there was Noah Reed, the sheriff's grandson, a sturdy boy with sandy hair and a freckled nose wearing his favorite blue overalls. Despite their frayed knees, Noah had never known the darkness that touched the others, but he treated them all like old friends, never asking questions, simply running, kicking the ball, laughing without pause. Under the shade of a sprawling oak tree, Sonny lay stretched out in the cool grass, his thick golden fur catching the sunlight like a halo. His eyes, deep pools of unwavering loyalty, followed Eli's every move. His ears twitched occasionally at the shrieks of laughter, but his tail thumped lazily against the earth content. Around his neck hung a simple new tag engraved carefully by Jessica's own hand, Sunny Guardian of Maple Hollow. Jessica Turner sat nearby on a weathered bench, a basket of sandwiches and lemonade at her feet. Her brown hair, now streaked with a few new silver strands, was loose around her shoulders. Her posture, once tight with worry, had relaxed, her arms draped comfortably across the back of the bench as she watched the scene unfold. Beside her sat Claire Donovan, dressed in jeans and a gray flannel shirt, her dark hair a little longer, now her face softer around the edges. She nursed a cup of coffee and wore an expression of quiet contentment, tinged with lingering resolve. Claire had made good on her promise to stay. With the community's blessing, she had set up a small investigative unit inside the old town library, now renovated with bright walls and wide windows. Flyers for missing children hung on one side of the room, but beneath them grew a wall of success stories, photographs of those found, returned, healed. Claire still searched for her daughter, Lila, the ache of that quest a steady drumbeat beneath her work. But she no longer carried the burden alone. Maple Hollow had taken up the search as its own. Marjorie Phelps, the stern court clerk, had retired shortly after Cole's trial, and now ran a small coffee cart near the town square. She waved to the children every afternoon, slipping them free cookies when she thought no one was looking. Sheriff Reed, having submitted his resignation with quiet dignity, spent his days restoring the old community center. His hands calloused his spirit, seeking redemption through work. Life, broken and battered, had knitted itself back together with golden thread. As Eli chased the soccer ball toward the far fence, he tripped and tumbled into the grass landing with a soft grunt. Sonny was up in an instant, trotting over to him. Eli laughed, pushing himself up on his elbows, and as Sonny nudged him with his nose, Eli wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck, burying his face into the warm fur. You saved my life, Sonny." Eli whispered the words, carried away on the breeze, but heard nonetheless by the ones who mattered most. Jessica pressed a hand over her heart, blinking rapidly against the tears stinging her eyes. Claire smiled faintly into her coffee. The sun dipped lower, painting the grass in long, honeyed shadows. The children collapsed into a heap near the oak tree. Their cheeks flushed their limbs, tangled in the easy camaraderie that only true safety could foster. Sonny lay among them like a golden sentinel, his presence a silent vow that no darkness would touch them again. Across the park, the town square flickered to life, with twinkling string lights, and music drifted from an old radio propped on a folding chair. Families pulled out picnic blankets, and someone lit a bonfire in a nearby pit, sending sparks spiraling into the indigo sky. As twilight embraced Maple Hollow, Claire leaned toward Jessica and said quietly, "You know, I think this town is going to be just fine." Jessica nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Because of you," she said. Claire shook her head, watching Eli and Sonny framed against the dying light. "Because of them." The stars winked to life overhead, each one a reminder that even the deepest night could end in light. And beneath them, in the gentle heart of Maple Hollow, laughter and hope stitched a new beginning, one woven with trust, with courage, and with the unbreakable bond between a boy and his dog. Sonny lifted his head toward the night sky, ears, pricked nose, twitching at the sense of bonfire smoke and fresh-cut grass. His tail thumped once against the earth, content. The world was right again. At least here, at least for now. And that was enough. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not loud or sudden. They come quietly, wrapped in small moments of courage, kindness, and unexpected friendships. In a world often shadowed by fear and loss, it is easy to forget that healing does not always come through grand victories, but through silent, steadfast love like that between a little boy and a faithful dog. We are reminded that even when darkness falls, God's light can find a way through the cracks, using the most unlikely of heroes to guide us back to hope. It may not come as a thunderclap or a booming voice, but in the soft thump of a tail against the earth and a child's first whispered word, after silence in the community that refuses to give up. In our daily lives, we can choose to be part of that miracle. A kind word, a listening ear, a helping hand. These are the seeds of hope we plant every day. No act of love is too small when done with a faithful heart. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles are still real. Leave a comment and type, "Amen," if you believe in the quiet ways God works through the ones we least expect. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope, and may God bless you and your family with healing, joy, and light wherever you are.